The story begins deep in the Kin Nei Mountain, where Toad Ridge sits high above. In this near-empty village called Toad Village, a man told his companion that back when their old leader was around, they were so powerful even local bandits feared them. But after their leader died, all the brothers left the new village master and ran off. Now only a few remained. He warned his companion that the officers would soon come to clear out the bandits, and they wouldn't survive if they stayed. He urged him to flee while there was still time. Just then, another man appeared, his clothes tied to a pole. He complained that the new leader, only 18, was too young and naive. He asked if they still planned to abandon him, then angrily told those thinking of leaving to get lost. With that, he ran off laughing, saying he'd leave first. But soon after, the others smiled at each other and decided to leave too. Chong Dal, the new village master, sat on a wooden chair under a tiger-skin rug, holding his head in pain. He complained about strange memories flooding his mind, wondering if he had been transported to another world. In his previous life, he had been a regular university student, playing a strategy game called Hearts of the Mountain Bandit, when he suddenly fainted and woke up in this new world. Now, his memories and those of the body he was in were blending. In the memories, the village was in ruins. He had inherited it after his father died. The village, founded 120 years ago, used to oversee 108 cities and 13 prefectures, once controlling both land and sea. But that was long ago. Now, the empire was weakening, and endless wars caused suffering. Many people turned to banditry just to survive. Toad Village had once been famous and strong, but after the old leader's death, the bandits left one by one, leaving Chong Dal as the last one remaining. As Chong Dal sighed, a hand landed on his shoulder, startling him. It was Zenji, the village strategist, still around despite his useless ideas. Surprised Zenji hadn't left yet, Chong Dal grabbed his hand and thanked him. But Zenji revealed that the village had run out of supplies and asked if he could take the last skinny horse since no one else wanted it. Chong Dal, disheartened, let him take it. Zenji, grinning, also asked for the tiger-skin rug. Chong Dal, exhausted, agreed, and Zenji called for Linger to hurry up and get the horse. Left alone, Chong Dal wondered how he'd survive in this strange world. Suddenly, a symbol appeared behind his head, and a hand smacked him. Startled, he looked around, confused. He found himself in a vast, pixelated space, with sparkles floating in the air. In front of him appeared a beautiful blonde woman with diamond-shaped antennas on her head. She introduced herself as the spirit of the system and told Chong Dal that he was finally here. She held a blue diamond, explaining that he had unlocked the system. The blue diamond burst into light, and a screen with a loading bar appeared in front of him. Chong Dal realized he was in the game, Hearts of the Mountain Bandits. The blonde woman confirmed his suspicions, explaining that she was here to help. The system gave him a mission. Do not let the village population drop to 1. If he failed, the system would disappear. A blue aura surrounded Chong Dal, and the mission to stop Zenji and Linger from leaving was issued. The spirit warned him there would be no second chances, and if he failed, he'd be killed. Fear took over as Chong Dal called out for Zenji and chased after him into the forest, begging him to stay. Zenji, standing by the horse with his daughter, Linger, asked if the village master regretted his decision. Chong Dal got distracted by Linger's beauty and asked Zenji about her. Zenji explained that she was his daughter, who usually took care of the horses. Chong Dal praised Zenji, urging him not to leave, saying that without him, the village would be nothing. But Zenji insisted he was just a burden and too old to be of any use. Chong Dal argued that the village needed him and promised that they wouldn't go hungry while he was alive. He declared he would rob someone to ensure their survival, grinning as he wondered what reward he might get from the system. Linger, annoyed, handed him a giant axe, which made Chong Dal sweat nervously. He had imagined something more fitting for a hero, not an axe for chopping wood. A pop-up box appeared, signaling mission completion. He had stopped the strategist and groomer from leaving. As a reward, Chong Dal received an axe skill book, which he quickly integrated. Zenji warned him that going alone was dangerous, but Chong Dal insisted Zenji come with him. With the axe on his shoulder and determination on his face, Chong Dal asked if Zenji had any final thoughts. Zenji said nothing, and they set off together, pulling the horse. Another mission appeared: carry out a successful robbery before nightfall. Success would bring rewards. Failure meant death. As the sun set over the mountain, Chong Dal, Zenji, and the horse stood silhouetted against the brilliant sky. In the midst of a mountain covered with lush trees and a breathtaking sunset, a squad of armed soldiers moved through on horseback, some walking behind a carriage. One of the soldiers called out to warrior Lin, who was riding ahead with another soldier, warning him about the many mountain bandits in the area. They needed to be cautious since they were escorting the fiancé of the city lord's son. As Lin considered this, he responded confidently, saying it had been too peaceful since the escort mission began, and he longed for a battle. If any bandits dared to rob them, he'd gladly let them taste his spear. While this conversation occurred, Chong Dal and Zenji stood at the edge of the mountain road, watching the sunset fade. Zenji, ever anxious, advised his village leader that the sun was setting and perhaps they should retreat since no one had arrived yet. Chong Dal, however, was adamant they wait longer. A short while later, a soldier on horseback praised Lin for how smooth the mission had been, accompanying the lady of the Su family to Black Rock City for her wedding, which would strengthen ties between her family and the city. Another soldier walking beside the carriage told housekeeper Wang they shouldn't worry too much because no one would dare attack them while working for the city lord, to which Wang agreed with a nod. From a distance, Chong Dal spotted the approaching group. Zenji, clearly nervous, counted the soldiers and advised they retreat, seeing how outnumbered they were. Chong Dal responded calmly, but Zenji, looking increasingly worried, exclaimed that he didn't want to die alongside him. Despite his outward loyalty, it was clear Zenji was far from confident in their plan. As the armed team approached the curved road, Zenji began to sweat and panic, thinking of ways to escape. Uncomfortably, he patted his horse's rear and muttered something about it being a good horse, which left Chong Dal confused. Then, without warning, Zenji stabbed the horse's rear, causing it to scream in pain and bolt forward. Chong Dal, shocked, shouted Zenji's name as the animal accelerated wildly. Zenji, in a panicked state, yelled down to the soldiers that the village leader of Toad Village was coming to rob them. As Chong Dal and his horse charged toward the soldiers, they looked on in confusion. Zhu Xinji, meanwhile, declared that anyone who didn't want to die should leave everything behind, though Zenji, already retreating in fear, mumbled to himself that he was sorry but had a daughter to raise and couldn't afford to die today. Chong Dal, now furious, berated Zenji not only for betraying him but for announcing their intentions so brazenly. When Chong Dal reached the carriage, he pulled hard on the reins, causing his horse to rear up. He barely managed to regain control, sweating profusely, as the soldiers stared in stunned silence. One soldier, trying to grasp the situation, reached for his sword, but Chong Dal quickly raised both palms, explaining that it was all a misunderstanding and that he wasn't the leader of Toad Village. He claimed his name was Zenji, a scholar, and urged the soldiers to surrender. The soldiers, far from intimidated, exchanged looks of disbelief and began to laugh, speculating whether Chong Dal was attempting suicide. Warrior Lin, observing the scene, smiled while Wang silenced his comrades. Wang then approached Chong Dal, calmly telling him that perhaps he didn't know who they were, and that his life was too valuable to throw away over a robbery attempt. As Wang finished speaking, a delicate hand emerged from the carriage window, parting the pink curtain. A beautiful blue-eyed, pink-haired woman appeared, glancing outside. Chong Dal was instantly mesmerized, never having seen such a beautiful lady before. Suddenly, the system spirit appeared above Chong Dal, slapping him out of his daze and scolding him for being a pervert. Only Chong Dal could see the spirit, which materialized outside its subspace. Despite his minimal power and experience, Chong Dal begged the spirit to stop hitting him, but she called him foolish and presented a hidden mission: rob the fiancé. The spirit warned the mission was beyond his abilities, though Chong Dal considered it carefully, knowing hidden missions offered greater rewards. Determined, he accepted the challenge, declaring that if he succeeded, he would gain a wife, and if he failed, he would die. The spirit, disappointed, muttered that he was lusting after the woman, but Chang Dal stood firm. Meanwhile, warrior Lin was excited to finally encounter a robber with guts. He instructed his soldiers not to interfere, as he wanted a one-on-one fight. His comrades cheered, eager to see if the rumors about Lin's strength were true, and urged him not to finish too quickly so they could witness his abilities. Lin assured Chang Dal that he wouldn't take his life and told him not to hold back. The system spirit provided Chang Dal with information about Lin, a spear warrior with piercing skills and the hidden potential to become a great hero. Chang Dal, still on horseback, boasted that he had killed many nameless men with his axe and asked Lin for his name. Lin introduced himself as Lin Shu and asked whether Chang Dal was really the village leader or a scholar. Caught off guard, Chang Dal hastily made up a name, Wai Chun Yen, but Lin quickly pointed out that no such place existed among the 108 cities and 13 prefectures. Without further delay, Chang Dal swung his axe ferociously, screaming that Lin's head was his. Lin deflected the blow with his spear, though he was surprised by Chang Dal's strength. On the second swing, Lin was thrown off his horse, his spear spiraling to the ground as he tumbled down. Chang Dal pressed on, leaving the soldiers speechless as he jumped off his horse and kicked the carriage driver aside. The beautiful lady inside the carriage looked on in worry as Chang Dal struck the horse with his axe, sending it into a wild run. Grabbing the reins, he charged toward the soldiers, who scattered in fear. Wang, still in shock, shouted for his soldiers to chase after Chang Dal, warning them that failure would mean their deaths. Zenji kept walking until he reached Toad Village just before sundown and immediately called for Linger. Once inside, he quickly urged his daughter to close the village gates. Linger asked why he had returned alone and where the village master was. Zenji insulted the village master, calling him an idiot, and remarked that if he hadn't been quick to flee, Linger would never have seen her father again. Zenji was drenched in sweat, groaning and lamenting the situation, but his daughter tried to comfort him by reminding him that the dead couldn't come back to life, so there was no point in being upset. Zenji clarified that he wasn't mourning the master's death but rather upset about his excellent horse, which disappointed Linger. He went on to say that the village was no longer safe to live in, and he ordered Linger to check and clean everything, including the garlic and the kitchen. Meanwhile, the armed soldiers on horseback continued their chase of Chang Dal and the carriage. Chang Dal yelled for them to hurry up while holding tightly to the horse's reins. Suddenly, the system spirit materialized above him, offering him a chance to draw from a lottery, having completed a mission and earned a lottery chance. Chang Dal, still in a panic, agreed and started drawing while continuing to whip the horse forward. The system spirit teased him, asking if he wanted to draw the reward first or whip the horse, which infuriated him. He threatened to whip her, but the spirit, undisturbed and playful, kept tormenting him. Chang Dal finally confessed that he wanted to draw the reward first, adding that if she wanted to kill him, she might as well do it now. The system spirit simply giggled in response. The system spirit snapped her fingers, and a lottery machine appeared. She began to shake it slowly, cradling it in her arms as the armed soldiers closed in. Wang, one of the soldiers, cursed and vowed to flay Chang Dal alive. As the lottery machine spun, Chang Dal's anxiety grew, begging the spirit to hurry up as the soldiers were relentlessly pursuing him. The system spirit finally produced a ball from the machine, revealing that Chang Dal had gained a powerful unknown hunter named Kinman. Chang Dal was taken aback, marveling at how the system could summon an actual human being. As the soldiers drew nearer, Chang Dal wondered where Kinman would appear, as there were only rocks around him. He nervously tried to summon Kinman by pointing his finger and jokingly chanting, "Go Pikachu, I choose you," but nothing happened. He continued trying with growing desperation as the system spirit watched in confusion. He tried another chant, summoning Kinman with exaggerated hand gestures, calling for backup. Just then, Warrior Lin appeared, nearly hitting the carriage with his spear. shouting for Chong Dal to return so he could kill him. Chong Dal's eyes widened in terror. Suddenly, Kinman appeared, his long brown hair blowing in the wind, with an X-shaped scar on his chest and a spear in hand. Chong Dal was astonished by the system's ability to summon a person just in time. As Lin charged at him, Kinman commanded him to dismount, driving his spear into Lin's horse and causing it to collapse. The soldiers were dumbstruck by Kinman's sheer strength. Wang, now sweating profusely, ordered his men to surrender or they would face Black Rock City's wrath. But Kinman stood tall, striking Wang across the face with his spear and knocking out his teeth. Terrified, Wang called for a retreat, and the soldiers fled to report back to their leader. Kinman approached the village master, informing him that he had come to serve under him. Meanwhile, the system spirit displayed a box with information on Kinman, a skilled hunter with a 3-core plum blossom spear technique, who had become a wanted man in Black Rock City after avenging his wife's death. Chong Dal realized that while this was just a character backstory for him, for Kinman, it was his real life, lived in a dangerous and war-torn time. As they traveled back to Toad Village, Chong Dal noticed the skinny horse he had abandoned had returned on its own. Both Chong Dal and Kinman mounted their horses, the glowing sunset painting the sky as they made their way back to the village. Zenji, holding a string of garlic, instructed Linger to carry a pot and ensure nothing was left behind. Linger, already struggling, protested that she couldn't carry any more. With the garlic garland around his neck, Zenji insisted that they needed to carry everything or they wouldn't survive. Just then, a voice offered them a horse. Chong Dal and Kinman arrived on horseback, pulling a carriage that Linger instantly recognized as belonging to the village master. Zenji's eyes went wide in shock as he realized the village master wasn't dead after all. He quickly covered his mouth, bowing slightly and expressing relief, confessing that he had been feeling useless. Linger began to cry as Chong Dal asked Zenji where he was headed, mocking him for giving his name to the soldiers who were now searching for him. This left Zenji flustered and sweating, but with clenched fists, he stubbornly declared that even in his old age, he still had his wits and could offer solutions. Grudgingly, Chong Dal agreed and introduced Zenji to Kinman, urging them to get along. He then told Linger to feed the horses, Kinman to prepare dinner, and strategist Zenji to carry the person in the carriage to their room. Zenji reluctantly boarded the carriage, and as it moved, Chong Dal reflected on completing his mission but realized he hadn't checked his rewards yet. Snapping his fingers, he summoned the system spirit, who appeared and scolded him for being rude, hitting him lightly and insisting he call her system goddess. Chong Dal, now sporting a red bump on his head, agreed. The system goddess commended him for successfully stealing someone's fiancée, then revealed his reward, the awakening of hidden attributes in someone. Her palm glowed with golden energy as she explained that he could choose whose attributes to awaken. Chong Dal was confused by this unexpected reward, but was interrupted when Zenji stood before him, clearly the one whose hidden attributes had been awakened. The night had nearly settled. The defeated soldiers had temporarily set up camp with bonfires somewhere in the Kinnu Mountains. Commander Wang asked one of his fellow soldiers if he wanted to survive, to which the soldier naturally replied that he did. Wang pressed further, asking how many mountain bandits had attacked them earlier. The soldiers exchanged silent looks before one, sweating heavily, answered that there had been 100 bandits. Wang became frustrated, declaring he had seen 300 with his own eyes. As Wang sat by the fire, he continued telling the story of their fight with the bandits, explaining that they had risked their lives but managed to kill only a few. He mentioned that warrior Lin had disappeared, and Miss Su had been captured. His fellow soldier remained silent, listening as Wang told everyone that if they wanted to survive, they needed to make their injuries more believable, and so they wrapped themselves in bandages. Wang then ordered them to return to the city to request reinforcements. Nearby, warrior Lin stood silently by the bonfire with his spear, filled with regret over failing Commander Hong's orders to oversee the escort, leading to Miss Su's kidnapping. His face bore evident injuries as he swore to Hong that he would risk his life to save Miss Su. A few moments later, the system's goddess appeared, displaying a pop-up with information about Zhu Xinji, a famously lousy strategist aged 49, whose hidden talent was devising foolish plans that would always result in failure. Chang Dao was disappointed, having expected Shinji to be at least a mediocre strategist, but now realizing he was utterly incompetent. Zhu Shinji, unaware of this, asked the village master what was wrong. Chang Dao dismissed it and asked Shinji what he wanted. Shinji explained that he had spoken with a woman named Sui, who was the fiancée of the young master of Black Rock City. He warned that the village master should not have abducted her, as the previous master who crossed Black Rock City had also died. Shinji cautioned that they would face death if Black Rock City retaliated again. As dusk settled, Linger, holding a bowl, informed her father and the village master that dinner was ready. Chang Dao gathered Kinmen, Zhu Shinji, and Linger to discuss their situation over supper. They sat by the fire as Chang Dao asked if anyone knew what was happening in Black Rock City. Kinmen revealed some knowledge, describing Black Rock City as being 150 miles away from Toad Ridge and ruled by Han Hui, a ruthless womanizer with 5,000 elite soldiers. Zhu Shinji lamented the hopeless gap between their 4-person group and 5,000 soldiers, asking the village master if he thought they could win. Chang Dao sarcastically asked what Shinji wanted him to do. Send the woman back, admit they were wrong, and beg for mercy? He asked Shinji if he thought that would work, to which Shinji backed down, telling him to ignore what he had said. Both Shinji and Linger looked stunned when Kinmen suggested they take the initiative and attack Black Rock City first, claiming they had a 70% chance of capturing Han Hui. Shinji leaned over to Linger, whispering that they should run, as they would die otherwise. Linger sobbed, saying they were already as good as dead. Chang Dao insisted that escape wasn't an option. He explained that Black Rock City wasn't lacking women, and even if they retaliated, they wouldn't send all 5,000 soldiers, at most 100 or 200. Furthermore, the city was 150 miles away, meaning it would take them 5 days to travel back and forth. In those 5 days, they could set up an ambush and potentially win the fight. The system's goddess appeared again, informing Chang Dao that he had activated a new mission to defend the village and repel the enemy attack. She added that the mission's difficulty was even greater than the last. Chang Dao went on to explain that his father had died fighting Black Rock City's forces, and he needed to avenge him. Kinmen, too, had a grudge against Han Hui. If they didn't take revenge, how could they live in peace? Kinmen stated firmly that they had to secure the village, no matter what. Chang Dao outlined that there were 2 roads leading to Toad Ridge. Shinji explained that the smaller road was through a valley, unsuitable for carriages, while the other road could be used for an ambush. Chang Dao, aware of Shinji's incompetence, knew they would perish if they followed his advice. He asked Shinji which road the enemy would likely take, and with confidence, Shinji chose the official road, puffing on his pipe. Chang Dao already knew which path the enemy would use but continued to humor Shinji by asking if he thought they could win. Shinji, puzzled, admitted that he thought they would be wiped out with no chance of a miracle. Chang Dao responded that he believed they had a chance to win and that miracles could happen. Grinning, he thought to himself that with Shinji's uselessness, all he needed to do was the opposite of whatever Shinji suggested to avoid failure. Later that night, as the moon shone through thin clouds, someone reflected on the fact that God hadn't abandoned her yet. It was Miss Su sitting alone in her room. When Chang Dao entered and encouraged her to eat, she was surprised but remained silent. Chang Dao thought to himself that Miss Su was a beautiful woman with an attractive figure. Suddenly, his inner thoughts began to entertain dark desires, thinking he could do whatever he wanted with her. But the real Chang Dao quickly covered his mouth, suppressing these impulses, reminding himself that he couldn't act on them because he was a decent man and feared that crossing this line would make him a villain. The system goddess appeared, praising Chang Dao for being righteous, and informed him that he had triggered a new mission, to win Miss Su's heart without using violence. She added that only a true man could rule the world, but first, he had to win over women by being a gentleman. Chang Dao offered Miss Su some food, noting that she probably wouldn't sleep that night. He accidentally called her Ang, before quickly correcting himself and addressing her as Miss Su. He asked if she, too, was unable to sleep. Miss Su asserted that her family was one of the 4 great families of Fallen Leaf City, and offered Changdal gold if he allowed her to return home. She also warned him that she was the fiancée of the young master of Black Rock City, and that if he harmed her, there would be consequences. Changdal explained that there had been a misunderstanding. He had no desire to harm her. Rather, he sought revenge against Black Rock City's leader, and capturing her was a way to lure him out. He promised to release her once it was over. Miss Su, skeptical, called Changdal a liar, claiming that men only wanted to sleep with her and that he was no different. Changdal remained silent as Miss Su pleaded with him not to harm her and offered to meet his needs, whether it be gold, food, or something else. Suddenly, the system goddess appeared again, displaying information about Miss Su. Although she lacked talent, she possessed great insight. Changdal wondered whether he should try to convince her. Standing before Miss Su, he admitted that she probably saw him as nothing more than a violent bandit, but in truth, he had once wanted to be a scholar or a warrior. He looked out at the moonlit sky, saying he used to hold books in his hands, dreaming of studying literature, fighting like warriors, earning titles, and traveling the world. But he encountered greedy men who treated others as dirt. He started questioning why the world was so full of greed. Miss Su listened quietly as Changdal continued, expressing his desire to change the world so that all people could live in peace. At that moment, Changdal extended his hand toward her, asking if she would help him achieve this dream. Miss Su mentioned that even though what Changdal said might be a lie, she had the distinct feeling that he wouldn't hurt her and found herself confused by why she had this impression. She went on to say that Changdal could tell her whatever he wanted, as long as he didn't harm her, and she would do her best to cooperate. Changdal, however, remained silent for a moment before sitting down at the table and asking her to tell him more about what had happened in the world. This was likely the only genuine thing he had said since entering the room. They faced each other in silence as Changdal was determined to learn everything about the world, including the fact that Miss Su was a merchant's daughter. Time passed, and Changdal eventually bid her farewell, clenching his fists as he left. Later, Miss Su read a poem by candlelight while holding a sword, reflecting on the ambitious man trying to save the people from an occupied land. She thought about the Wu hook, which could be a sharp weapon, and about Guanchong and where the empire, with only 13 prefectures, had originated. Despite knowing that Changdal had lied to her, she found the poem too beautiful to dismiss and praised it. She believed that if she could present this at a talent poetry meeting, it would certainly astonish everyone. Meanwhile, Kinman stood quietly outside, drawing the attention of the village master. Changdal was startled to see him there and asked what he was doing. He began to wonder if Kinman had a habit of listening in on private conversations. Kinman clenched his fist and expressed how he initially thought the village master was no better than common bandits. However, after hearing their conversation, he was deeply moved and, realizing that Changdal had a dream, Kinman was willing to risk his life to make that dream a reality. Suddenly, the system goddess appeared and informed Changdal that he had unknowingly completed Kinman's hidden mission. Kinman, she explained, had long been grieving the loss of his wife and children, and by treating Miss Su with respect, Changdal had earned his trust. Changdal, with his arms crossed, stared at the pop-up screen, realizing that abducting Miss Su wasn't that different from the actions of Black Rock City's leader. He assumed that if he had harmed her, Kinman would have been the first to kill him. It dawned on him that earning the trust and loyalty of a strong person like Kinman was no easy feat. At dawn, Linger rushed in to tell the village master that someone was attacking the village. Changdal, surprised at how quickly they had arrived, asked how many attackers there were. Linger blushed as she replied that there was only one, a handsome man with a spear. Outside the village, Warrior Lin rode his horse and demanded that the dirty bandits of Toad Village come out and meet their end. He declared that if they had harmed Miss Su, he would kill them all. All four of them stepped outside to face the attacker, and Changdal scratched his head, calling Warrior Lin an idiot for coming alone. He then instructed Kinman to chase him off. As Kinman approached, Warrior Lin called out for him to bring his weapon and horse, promising that he wouldn't take advantage of him. But Kinman confidently replied that there was no need for such things. Suddenly, Kinman leapt high into the air, stomped down on the horse's head, and grabbed warrior Lin's face with his bare hands, leaving Lin dumbfounded. Man, I do not want to be a horse in this story. With a firm grip still on Lin's face, Kinman declared that he was weak. Warrior Lin, now panicking, shouted for him to let go. Without hesitation, Kinman hurled Lin through the air, sending him crashing into the trees. As Lin tumbled away, he yelled that he would return. As warrior Lin disappeared into the distance, descending from the mountains, Chong Dal's soft-hearted nature showed as he told Kinman not to bother him further and to let him take his horse back when he returned. Kinman, always loyal, agreed to do as the village master instructed. Chong Dal's eyes widened when the system notified him that he had successfully defended the village from the attack and that his reward was ready. A golden chest appeared, leaving him to wonder if something was wrong. He thought the mission had been too easy, considering the system had indicated a higher level of difficulty. Perhaps there was a glitch in the system. The system goddess handed Chong Dal a scroll listing his rewards. He received a metal spear, upgraded horses for the mountain, a healing effect within the mountain, and a random skill upgrade for one of his people. This left Chong Dal feeling extraordinarily lucky. Additionally, he was awarded 10 farming lands. Feeling sore from the overwhelming excitement, Chong Dal rubbed his legs and compared his situation to killing an ant and receiving gold as a reward. He felt as if he had won the lottery or been blessed by fortune. The rewards continued to pour in, 10 wooden boxes and more, prompting him to ask if something was wrong with the system. The system goddess, calm as ever, reminded him that she was simply a spirit and that whether there was a bug or not, it was beyond her control. She wouldn't be blamed for it, and she suggested he take the rewards and leave the system's subspace. Chong Dal bowed slightly, still astonished by his luck. Zhu Shinji, noticing his dazed expression, asked what was wrong with him. Just then, the system goddess presented Chong Dal with a new mission: to defend the village against a second attack, which would be even more challenging than the first. Chong Dal sensed that the real threat was now drawing near, and that the rewards he had received were merely a minor consolation before the true chaos began. Meanwhile, Zhu Shinji, who knew his village master had found himself a wife, advised him to pull himself together as his legs were shaking. Chong Dal, irritated, told Shinji to keep quiet about it. A spear suddenly landed on the ground, and Chong Dal reminded himself to stay alert, as he was now facing a life-and-death situation. Warrior Lin, wounded and with torn clothes, continued his trek over the mountains, gripping his spear. Despite his condition, Lin stood resolutely and chuckled to himself as he declared, "I'm back." As Warrior Lin continued to fight them, Zhu Shinji grew frustrated and suggested they should just kill him this time. This enraged Chong Dal, who called Zhu Shinji a fool, reminding him that Warrior Lin was their benefactor, and stating that anyone who wanted to kill Lin would have to kill him first. Chong Dal continued to be friendly towards Warrior Lin, asking if he was hungry and inviting him inside to eat, claiming that their food was delicious and asking if he wanted to try some. This left Zhu Shinji utterly confused. From a distance, Warrior Lin stood tall, his spear thrust into the ground. He shouted back, calling them dirty bandits and telling them not to spout nonsense, challenging them to come at him. He declared that this time, he wouldn't use his horse or weapon, but would fight them barehanded. Chong Dal, in response, ordered Kinman not to kill Warrior Lin, instructing him to be gentle and control his strength. Kinman assured his master he would. Standing in front of Kinman, Warrior Lin bravely issued his challenge. Out of nowhere, Kinman lunged forward and hit him with one hand, sending Lin flying backward once again. Chong Dal called out to Warrior Lin, asking if he was okay and saying he would wait for him to return when he felt better. The system goddess then appeared with a scroll listing the rewards for successfully completing the second defense mission, including a mountain spring, 10 blood pills, a bonus village skill, 10 sickles, and 5 wooden boxes. However, these rewards failed to impress Chong Dal, as they seemed mediocre compared to the first reward. Meanwhile, Warrior Lin, now armed with a wooden staff, slowly made his way back up the steep route to Toad Village, triggering a third mission to defend the village once more. When he arrived, Chong Dal asked if he was okay. Despite his bruised face and missing teeth, Warrior Lin insisted he would keep coming until Miss Su was released. Chang Dal shook his head and told Kinman to be gentle with him. Kinman punched Warrior Lin again, and they successfully completed the third defense, earning another reward. Warrior Lin returned yet again, prompting a fourth defense mission. Every time Warrior Lin appeared, a new mission was triggered, and each time, they earned rewards after defeating him. After a while, Linger asked Chang Dal if they could go back inside because she was hungry, but Chang Dal told her to wait, knowing that Warrior Lin wouldn't give up. The system goddess appeared with a pop-up, informing Chang Dal that after successfully completing 10 defenses without any deaths, he had gained a hidden attribute, an increase in charisma for males, though it wouldn't affect females. She added that kind-hearted people attract others with shared ideals of righteousness, especially younger men who are drawn to such principles. Chang Dal questioned why he had to keep playing the role of the nice guy. He waited for Warrior Lin to show up but began to worry when Lin didn't appear on time. Concerned that something might have happened to him, Chang Dal ordered his people to stay behind while he went down the mountain to search for Lin. As the sun set, Chang Dal found Warrior Lin standing at the edge of a cliff, holding his wooden staff. Lin, feeling humiliated by the bandits, lamented losing both his horse and his spear. He cried out, vowing to die that day, hoping that in his next life, he would be reborn as a hero whose name would be known throughout the land. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he prepared to end his life. Chang Dal coughed, interrupting Lin's thoughts, and asked him to choose one option. Warrior Lin was enraged, thinking that this bandit was mocking him in his moment of despair. Lin declared that, despite his lack of skill, he would rather die than suffer this humiliation. Chang Dal calmly responded, saying he had heard everything Lin said and admitted that while Lin was an honest man, he was also naive. He went on to explain that young fools often die for their dreams, while real men live humbly to make their dreams come true. Chang Dal's words surprised Warrior Lin, who had thought it brave to die for one's ambitions. Chang Dal lambasted him, saying that killing oneself was cowardly, not brave. He accused Lin of trying to escape reality rather than facing it. He angrily questioned how Lin dared to call himself a warrior. Warrior Lin, still reeling from the conversation, admitted that he didn't understand why a mountain bandit would say such things. Chang Dal explained that while Lin despised bandits, he too had dreams once. He used to be a man full of ideals, longing to learn literature, fight like a warrior, and win titles. Chang Dal recited a line from a poem. With a sword in hand, the ambitious man seeks to rescue the people from the occupied land. He told Lin that he had wanted to travel the world and cross the seas, but had encountered greedy people who treated others like dirt. This made him question why the world was so filled with greed. Chang Dal continued, explaining that he wanted to rebuild the world, creating peace so that all people could live freely. As he finished, he smiled and extended his hand to Warrior Lin, asking if Lin would help him achieve that dream. Warrior Lin, shocked by these words coming from a bandit, found his vision blurring as he struggled to remain standing. He wondered if he was dreaming. Could this young man with such noble ideals truly be a bandit? As these thoughts consumed him, Lin felt himself slipping toward the edge of the cliff. Just before he fell, Chang Dal grabbed Warrior Lin's hand, pulling him back from the brink. He laid him down and assessed his injuries, which were severe. Yet, despite this, Lin had still attempted to rescue Miss Su. A few moments later, a towel, water basin, and a bowl of medicinal soup were brought to treat Warrior Lin. Lying on the floor with a bandage on his head, Warrior Lin was covered with a cloth as Chang Dal asked Zhu Xinji if the village had any more medication. Zhu Xinji mentioned that the gangs who had left long ago had likely taken any remaining supplies and expressed concern that Warrior Lin could be a spy. Chang Dal, however, responded that after listening to Lin, he trusted him. Concerned that Lin's inflammation could be life-threatening, Chang Dal used a blood oil treatment to reduce it. He then summoned Linger, instructing her to bring him a shovel and hoe. Linger returned with the heavy tools, and together with Zhu Xinji, they followed Chang Dal as they searched for treasure. Zhu Xinji objected, arguing that there was no treasure left in the village and that they shouldn't destroy the land, but Chang Dal persisted. In the stables, Chong Dal found a blood pill provided by the system and fed it to warrior Lin. He then told Kinman that the black horse would be his, to which Kinman gratefully responded. A pop-up box revealed that the yellow horse had an escape skill, and the black horse had a charge skill. Meanwhile, Linger discovered a metal spear on the road and showed it to the village master. Later, Chong Dal gave the elite spear to Kinman, who was astounded because it was something he had only dreamed of. With this spear, his skills would reach a whole new level. A pop-up box declared Kinman the top bandit of Toad Village, now wielding the powerful 3-core plum blossom spear. The system goddess reappeared, presenting a lengthy list of rewards for the day. A spear, common armor, blood pills, a war drum, flag, wine, sickles, a map, scribe cloth, farmland, a well, mountain spring skills, upgraded horses, healing abilities, and unity. However, Chong Dal was disappointed because there was no sword for his dream of becoming a swordsman, leaving him feeling a bit hopeless. As Chong Dal puzzled over not finding the 50 wooden boxes, Zhu Xinji lifted a small entrance hidden beneath a haystack, leading to a basement. They unlocked it and descended the stairs, finally discovering the 50 wooden boxes piled up. As Zhu Xinji climbed down, he asked the village master if the old master had left him an inheritance. Standing next to the stack of wooden boxes, Zhu Xinji wondered aloud if these were the old village master's savings, to which Chong Dal replied that he wasn't sure. Chong Dal then invited him to open them and see what was inside. Chong Dal splashed his face with water to wash away his bad luck before opening one of the wooden boxes. A brilliant light flashed from inside, and he was reminded of past moments when he had drawn countless SSRS rewards, always excited about what might come out, whether it be a famous beast, beautiful women, or legendary weapons. But this time, he only pulled out a box of stones, which was basically worthless. The system goddess smiled, giving him a thumbs up, but Chong Dal felt frustrated, cursing as he stared at the useless stone in his hand, knowing he couldn't change his fate. Zhu Xinji offered to open a box for his village master, but Chong Dal declined, certain that Xinji's luck was even worse than his own. Ignoring him, Xinji opened one of the wooden boxes and curiously examined its contents. Chong Dal checked inside with his hand and immediately recognized it as gunpowder. Zhu Xinji asked if the black substance was edible. Chong Dal ignored the absurd question and ordered Xinji to open all the boxes to see if there were more filled with gunpowder. When they finished, they found 10 boxes of gunpowder, 20 boxes of useless stones, and a pile of broken weapons and torn clothes, just as displayed by the system goddess's pop-up box. Despite the meager findings, Chong Dal smiled, realizing that the gunpowder and the mountain roads could be used strategically to defend against an impending attack from Black Rock City. As they exited the basement, Chong Dal told Xinji to keep the wooden boxes intact because they might still need them. Xinji, however, commented that the boxes could be good firewood for the winter. Chong Dal threatened to fire him if he broke any of them. Chong Dal then asked where the village field was, and Zhu Xinji pointed to the back hill, noting that it had been deserted for years. Curious, Chong Dal decided to take a look. Despite it being late and the moon shining brightly, they walked towards the field. Xinji complained, wondering why they were heading out so late just to see an abandoned piece of land. Along the way, Xinji remarked that he had thrown some wheat seeds there during spring but doubted anything had grown because the land was barren. However, to everyone's surprise, they arrived at a flourishing wheat field. Xinji was astounded, stepping into the field and praising divine intervention. Linger was scolded for running through the wheat and possibly damaging the sprouts, while the system goddess appeared to confirm that the 10 farmlands were accounted for. Kinman explained that if they harvested the 1,000 pounds of grain, they would have enough food to survive the winter. He also suggested that the straw could be burned for warmth and urged them to harvest quickly before the rainy season hit. Zhu Xinji and Linger knelt in gratitude, thanking the heavens for their blessings. Chong Dal, standing a distance away, reflected on the lives of bandits. He realized that not all of them were evil. Many were simply forced into banditry due to the harshness of the war-torn era. Among them were young and old people alike, some of whom even farmed to survive, and others who ventured down from the mountains to buy necessities. He thought of Zhu Shinji, who had once been a scholar in a village below the mountain. Shinji's greatest joy was earning enough money to buy wine and ogle at the widow's breasts. But in every world, there are evil people. One day, the village bullies started taking an interest in Linger, trying to force themselves on her. After rejecting them multiple times, Shinji devised a plan. He invited one of the bullies over, dressed Linger beautifully, and prepared wine and a roasted hen. He told the bully to admire how cute and beautiful Linger was, saying she would serve him well and that she was lucky to be with him. They drank and laughed, but when the bully got drunk, Shinji chopped off his head, burned his house down, and fled with Linger. After several twists and turns, they ended up in Toad Village. That was perhaps the only time one of Shinji's schemes succeeded, though Changdao also found it to be quite cunning. As they sat in the wheat field, Linger expressed a desire to harvest some wheat to make pancakes. But Zhu Shinji reminded her not to be wasteful and suggested she use elm leaves instead, so the pancakes could last longer. Linger, hungry, wanted to go with him, but Shinji didn't want to rush. Meanwhile, inside the village, Changdao stared at a grayish flag with red stripes. Zhu Shinji asked if it was their village flag, joking that it looked like it had been sewn into someone's pants. Changdao, who had been meaning to ask, inquired about the egg design on the toad emblem. Zhu Shinji explained that it wasn't an egg but a heavenly toad swallowing the moon. Changdao placed his hand on the flag and ordered Kinman to hang it up. Without hesitation, Kinman jumped onto the roof and then to the flagpole, swiftly hanging the flag. He landed back on the ground and joined the others. The full moon, now obscured by thin clouds, shone softly as the flag waved in the breeze. Kinman looked up, and it struck someone that they could survive the winter with plenty of food as long as they successfully defended against the next attack. That person was Changdao, and this marked the beginning of his mountain village. The system goddess appeared once again, declaring that the flag was a signal for heroes who had heard of Changdao's battles to come and join him. She presented Changdao with a new mission, to increase the mountain's population to 100 people, with the reward being a lottery draw. At the city lord's mansion, a tense atmosphere filled the room as Commander Wang knelt before the city lord, with a few women standing quietly behind him. Beside the table, a man sat, watching the exchange. Commander Wang, drenched in sweat, expressed his frustration and recounted how they had reached Toad Ridge, where they encountered hundreds of bandits led by a man who called himself the Toad King. He explained that he had charged at the bandits in an effort to save the young master's fiancée but was severely injured and ultimately failed to protect her. He admitted that he deserved punishment for his failure and asked to be killed. The city lord, remaining silent for a moment, then agreed and ordered that Commander Wang be executed. Just as Wang was being dragged away, a young man, the city lord's son, emerged from behind a large red curtain and intervened, pleading with his father to let him lead the troops to Toad Ridge and rescue Miss Su. The city lord dismissively replied that Miss Su was just a woman and assured his son that he could easily find him a new one. Undeterred, the young man bowed his head, hands clasped together, begging for the opportunity to prove himself as a man by saving his wife. The city lord, amused, asked how many soldiers his son would need for the task. When his son requested 2,000 soldiers, the city lord nearly spat out his tea in surprise. The man sitting beside the table was equally shocked, cautioning the young master that deploying 2,000 soldiers would require a massive amount of supplies and logistics, including horses and troop arrangements. Besides, there were only around 300 bandits at most. However, the young master confidently explained that he had considered everything, and his strategy was to overwhelm the bandits with sheer force. He requested 200 cavalry, 200 archers, 300 swordsmen, 100 armored knights, and 200 spearmen. His plan was simple. The cavalry would chase any retreating bandits, the archers would provide long-range support, the knights would block any frontal charges, and the swordsmen and spearmen would launch the main attack. The city lord, impressed by his son's ambition, allowed him to proceed. He pointed out that his son had always dreamed of leading troops into battle, and this would be his opportunity to experience war. He also ordered Commander Wang to join his son, giving him a chance to redeem himself. Commander Wang, grateful for the reprieve, bowed deeply, though in his mind, he wondered if losing his head might have been a better outcome, considering the unpredictable nature of their mission. Once the young master left, the city lord turned to his strategist, Bayan Chuan, for his opinion. Bayan, ever practical, pointed out that cavalry wouldn't perform well in the mountains, armored knights were ill-suited for long-distance travel, and the young master's plan had several flaws. He added that bandits typically held the defensive advantage and that overwhelming them with sheer numbers might not be the best approach. The city lord, however, was fully aware of these issues. He admitted that his son's knowledge of war was theoretical, learned from studying military tactics, but he lacked real-world experience. Nonetheless, the city lord allowed the young master to go ahead, viewing this battle as a small test. Bayan Chuan, relieved that the city lord understood the risks, asked whether they should inquire further into the young master's detailed plans. The city lord, however, dismissed any further discussion, stating that he was more interested in enjoying the company of the women in the room. He remarked that if Bayan Chuan ever experienced such pleasures, he would realize that nothing else in the world was worth worrying about. Bayan, left speechless, could only bow in deference. Meanwhile, back in Toad Village, Chong Dal sat on the floor surrounded by maps, deep in conversation with Miss Su. He asked why Black Rock City, with only 20,000 citizens, could sustain a standing army of 5,000 soldiers. Miss Su explained that troops were drawn from military households, and in times of larger conflict, ordinary citizens were conscripted. She also mentioned that Bayan Chuan had once tried to train 500 standing troops, but the plan had been abandoned due to the high cost of maintaining an army. Intrigued, Chong Dal inquired more about Bayan Chuan. Miss Su described him as the brilliant strategist in charge of both internal and external affairs of Black Rock City. Impressed but undeterred, Chong Dal gathered his maps and remarked that Black Rock City had a terrible ruler. Miss Su, somewhat offended, asked if Chong Dal thought he could govern the city better. He admitted he didn't know much about ruling, but his confidence remained unshaken. Miss Su then advised him to flee, warning that there were only 4 of them, and they would soon face an army of at least 200 soldiers. Chong Dal, unfazed, boldly declared that their numbers had now grown to 5 since warrior Lin had joined them. He confidently announced his plan to defend the village against 500 men. A short while later, Chong Dal stood near the small cottages in Toad Village, asking warrior Lin, who stood afar, how his body was holding up. Warrior Lin, still recovering but surprised by the question, addressed Chong Dal as the village master. Chong Dal extended his hand, speaking of their shared ideals. For a moment, warrior Lin was speechless, but then they clasped hands in mutual understanding, both united by their dreams and goals. At that moment, warrior Lin knew he had found something greater than revenge. Under the shade of a large tree, Chong Dal sat beside strategist Zhu Xinji, who was chewing on some bread. Chong Dal looked at him and said he had an important task for him, one that could significantly impact their chances of survival. Strategist Zhu, irritated, brushed him off, saying he wasn't the right person for such an important mission and that someone else should handle it. Chong Dal, however, insisted that only his one and only strategist could carry it out. This only annoyed Zhu Xinji further, who sarcastically asked if Chong Dal was so eager to get him killed. Still chewing, Chong Dal explained that he wanted Zhu to bring them some good wine and deliver a message to the surrounding bandit groups. The Flying Tiger Bandits, the Doghead Bandits, the Bald Bandits, the Apricot Blossom Bandits, the Wild Boar Bandits, and others, informing them that Black Rock City was planning to attack Kinnu Mountain. Zhu Xinji, concerned, asked whether those bandits would even trust him, given their grudge with the previous village leader. Chong Dal told him to use his brain and come up with a convincing story. But Zhu, still hesitant, said he was scared, especially since the last leader had left things on bad terms with those bandits. Chong Dal reassured him, saying warrior Lin would accompany him for protection. Zhu Xinji tried to suggest that Chong Dal himself should go, which made Chong Dal furious. He saw it as Zhu trying to get him killed. Persuading Zhu to go, Chong Dal winked and jokingly promised that if anything happened, he'd take care of Linger in his place. Chong Dal's face then turned dark and menacing as he added that he'd plaster the erotic drawings Zhu had sketched on the walls of Black Rock City. This shocked and horrified Zhu Shinji, leaving him no choice but to comply. A short while later, Warrior Lin took charge of the horses pulling a wagon loaded with jars, while Zhu Shinji sat uncomfortably on a haystack, silent and irritated by his situation. Chang Dao and Kinman stood behind them, watching as they departed. Kinman asked Chang Dao if the bandits would really trust Zhu Shinji. Chang Dao replied that, regardless of whether they trusted him or not, it was still worth trying. Opening a wooden box filled with gunpowder, Chang Dao examined its contents: gravel, straw, and oiled cotton lines serving as fuses for the bombs. After preparing the box, he waved a red flag, signaling Kinman to toss it farther away. A fiery explosion erupted, sending thick black smoke into the sky. Kinman, astonished by the explosion, told Chang Dao it looked like the breath of an earth dragon. Chang Dao proudly replied that it was the art of explosion. Meanwhile, outside the walls of Black Rock City, troops gathered in formation under the sun's scorching rays. The young master, pleased with the clear skies, took it as a good omen, though his soldiers thought otherwise, cursing the unbearable heat. One soldier, standing nearby, asked his uncle, Commander Wang, why he was still coming to war when he was about to turn 60. Uncle Wang silenced him, dismissing the battle as a mere skirmish with a few thieves and bandits. It wasn't worth much concern. The young master, standing tall with a sword at his side, approached a soldier holding a spear. With an eerie calmness, he placed his sword against the soldier's neck and asked if he was happy. Confused and scared, the soldier stammered, unsure how to respond. The young master coldly explained that in ancient times, generals would sacrifice someone before going to war. He had chosen this soldier as his sacrifice. The terrified soldier, thinking it was a joke, pleaded for his life, but the young master swiftly slit his throat, telling him that from now on, his family's name would be glorified by his sacrifice. The soldiers, enraged but forced to remain calm, cursed the young master under their breath as he gave the order to march. Covered in blood, he climbed into his comfortable carriage, enjoying a bowl of fruit under the shade of an umbrella as they headed towards the mountains. Commander Wang, riding beside the carriage, nervously asked why they weren't hurrying to attack. The young master arrogantly replied that as a commander, his role was to use his brain, not to charge into battle like a common soldier. Meanwhile, back in Black Rock City, strategist Bian Chuan rushed to the city lord's chambers, where the lord was distracted by the company of young girls. Bian, uneasy, informed the city lord that his son had been gone for an entire day and suggested sending 100 soldiers to follow him in case he needed help. The city lord, more interested in his pleasures, told Bian to handle it as he saw fit, so long as he wasn't disturbed. As soon as the orders were given, 100 soldiers mounted their horses and set off to catch up with the young master, dust billowing from their hooves as they galloped away. Meanwhile, the young master's troops continued marching through the mountains, even as night began to fall. Commander Wang advised the young master to take a rest, explaining that the soldiers were exhausted and that they had nearly reached the mountain ridge. The young master, however, dismissed the concern, insisting that speed was essential and that resting could give the bandits an opportunity to ambush them. Commander Wang tried to explain that the soldiers were nearing their breaking point, but the young master coldly responded that fatigue was insignificant in the face of war, where many would die anyway. As they reached a fork in the road, a soldier rode up to inform the young master of 3 possible routes: the official road, the mountain road, and the valley road in between. Commander Wang urged him to take the official road, warning him not to complicate things. But the young master, confident in his knowledge of strategy, opened a war scroll and declared that while Wang preferred the official road, the bandits would likely expect that and set traps along it. He intended to outwit them by taking a different route, leaving Commander Wang stunned and frustrated. Meanwhile, hidden in the bushes, a bandit observed the soldiers and quickly confirmed that Toad Village's information had been accurate. Black Rock City's troops were on the move. Slipping away quietly, he hurried to spread the word across Kin New Mountain. The bandit arrived at Flying Tiger Village, breathless, and reported that 1,000 soldiers were on their way to wipe out Toad Village. Inside the village, the bandits debated their next move. One man suggested they had nothing to worry about since the troops weren't heading toward their village. Another questioned why so many troops were mobilized just to deal with a village of 4 or 5 people. Gao, the leader of the Flying Tiger Bandits, expressed regret that their military strategist wasn't there but decided to wait and see what would happen next. The soldiers of Black Rock City marched along a narrow path, with the towering stone mountain looming beside them, as Chong Dal and Zenji quietly observed from the cliff's edge, hidden by the trees. Zenji informed his village master that at least 1,000 troops were approaching. Zenji urged his village master to retreat, believing they couldn't defeat such a large force. Chong Dal, however, replied that retreat was no longer an option. They would engage them as planned. The logs had been tied at the brink of the stone cliff. He explained that once the soldiers entered the valley, they would release the logs, Lin would ignite the explosives, and Zhu, Shinji, Kinman, and Linger would throw explosive boxes below. Zenji asked why they were only targeting one side of the valley when they could destroy both. Chong Dal explained that when trapped, men fight with remarkable ferocity, but if they believe there is an escape, they won't fight to the death. Unlike their enemies, they had no escape route. Chong Dal was informed they were preparing to leave the area and asked what they should do. Sweating profusely, Chong Dal instructed them to wait. He was reminded once more that their cavalry had already moved beyond the danger zone. Suddenly, Chong Dal shouted to act now, swinging his axe to sever the rope tied to the logs. As soon as the rope was cut, the logs tumbled down the mountain, crashing into the soldiers and their horses below, causing screams and chaos. Chong Dal ordered warrior Lin to light the explosives, but Lin hesitated, holding a torch in his trembling hand. He stood still, sweating, as Chong Dal placed a hand on his shoulder and asked if this was his first kill. Lin confessed there were too many people down there. Furious, Chong Dal shoved him against a tree, calling him a coward. Sweat pouring down his face, Chong Dal yelled that this was war, not a child's game. War was not dignified, it was about killing or being killed. Warrior Lin was shocked by Chong Dal's outburst. Chong Dal snatched the torch from Lin, warning that if they let their enemies escape today, they would all die. More explosions erupted from above and below the stone mountain, sending boulders crashing down. The Black Rock City soldiers panicked as the rocks fell, blocking their escape. Someone shouted that the exit was sealed and informed the village master that a few horsemen had already escaped through the pass. Fear swept through the soldiers as they believed they were being haunted by a mountain ghost. Another fiery explosion ignited, sending soldiers flying and burning them. The falling boulders continued to crush some as others fled, smoke and dust rising all around. One of the swordsmen shouted to his comrades to head for the hill. Kinman, riding his black horse, declared that he would hold them off. Chong Dal, deep in thought, realized that although a small group of soldiers had made it to the side, it would still be difficult to fend them off. Nevertheless, he agreed to Kinman's plan and commanded him to hold the line, while Zhu Shinji lit the pre-buried explosives to push the enemy back. Chong Dal ordered Linger and warrior Lin to continue throwing explosives. A black horse hit the ground, revealing Kinman in front of the swordsman and spearmen ordered to kill him. Fearlessly, Kinman faced them with his spear, announcing his name and warning them not to pass. As they approached, Kinman unleashed a devastating strike with his spear, sending soldiers and horses tumbling to the ground. Kinman pressed on with his attacks, shocking the enemy. He stood his ground, declaring they would not pass, as he pierced his spear into the chest of a swordsman on horseback. The soldier spat blood, thinking that if only they had more time to rest, the outcome of the battle might be different. Kinman was growing weary as the explosions continued and the boulders kept falling. Soldiers fled from the narrow path, chased by fiery blasts. Someone shouted for them to escape, but many couldn't avoid the explosions, their bodies engulfed in black smoke. The survivors raced away and reported to their young master, terrified by what they described as monsters. The young master stood in his carriage, watching the blazing explosions and dark smoke. His soldiers fled, but the young master raised his hand and commanded them to stop. He threatened that anyone who crossed a certain line would be killed. Certain of his own brilliance, he believed he could still turn the tide of this battle. His terrified soldiers insisted that there were ghosts in the mountain. Most of his men, now furious, raised their fists and questioned why he wouldn't let them retreat, even as they continued to run with weapons in hand. The young master's eyes widened in rage. He stood up and bellowed at his troops, commanding them to march to their deaths, but they ignored him, rushing past. Suddenly, one of the carriage wheels snapped, and the unbalanced carriage tipped over. The young master rose and observed the chaos as his soldiers were thrown around alongside debris from the blazing explosions. Commander Wang shouted at the young master, urging him to retreat as they had lost momentum, though there was still time to escape before the bandits caught up. The young master agreed, thinking that even great generals of ancient times learned from their defeats and gained experience for future battles. Meanwhile, his soldiers cried in fear as they fled, while stone fragments flew dangerously close to him. Despite the mayhem, the young master remained composed, raising both hands as he presented his sword to Commander Wang, stating that he looked forward to seeing his growth after the war. A rock hit Commander Wang's head, but he barely noticed, feeling more irritated than grateful toward the young master. Frustrated by the master's comments, Commander Wang pushed him down, cursing him to die, which left the young master in shock. Wang called him a fool and told him to go die alone as he ran off to save his own life, abandoning the young master. Meanwhile, on the cliff's edge, Chang Dao knelt, unsure if they had one, thinking how the panic of one person can lead to a chain reaction, causing others to flee. Zhu Xinji enthusiastically informed Chang Dao that they had achieved victory. Chang Dao rose and commanded warrior Lin and strategist Zenji to follow him to the battlefield. They jumped into a carriage, with Zenji guiding the horse and Chang Dao and warrior Lin standing with weapons in hand. Chang Dao ordered Linger to beat the drum. Linger grabbed the drumstick and pounded the drum with enthusiasm. The carriage rolled onto the battlefield, with the group shouting to charge and kill them all. When they arrived, they saw Kinmen fighting alone against numerous soldiers on horseback. Chang Dao shouted at the top of his lungs, telling the soldiers that those who wished to live should dismount, as he only needed their horses. Kinmen continued fighting, even as more soldiers pursued him. One soldier, panicked, yelled for his comrades to flee. Many had already fled on foot, leaving their horses behind as Kinmen's spear struck down his enemies. Chang Dao, his troops, and the horses watched the fleeing soldiers. Chang Dao ordered Zhu Xinji and Kinmen to bring the horses to the stables, while he and warrior Lin went off to seize valuable swords. Elsewhere, a group of bandits gathered near the narrow path of Stone Mountain, where flames from the explosions still blazed and dark smoke filled the air. They were the Flying Tiger Bandits. One of them questioned how the Toad village could withstand an attack from 1,000 warriors, leaving their village master speechless. Jie Fu, the leader of the Flying Tiger Bandits, remarked that they might have had help from an expert. His comrade sighed in disbelief, saying it was hard to imagine that 5 people could defeat 1,000 soldiers. Another comrade scolded him, reminding him they were bandits and shouldn't forget their duties. With that, Jie Fu, sword in hand, rallied his men to charge, intent on robbing their victims. The Flying Tiger Bandits slaughtered soldiers, demanding their weapons. They forced the soldiers to the ground, excited by the loot. One bandit, after noticing the state of his shoes, asked for the soldiers' shoes, even requesting their pants. One soldier begged the bandit not to take his virginity, but the bandit, insulted, cursed him, saying he only wanted his pants. Meanwhile, Chang Dao, chasing the terrified young master of Black Rock City on horseback, demanded the young master hand over his sword. Chang Dao continued to pursue him, shouting for him to stop. A loud clatter of hooves suddenly filled the air as a large group of soldiers on horseback approached Stone Mountain, their synchronized clopping signaling the arrival of elite troops. Chang Dao stopped his horse, realizing reinforcements might be nearby. The leader of the troops ordered his men to switch their spears for swords. Chang Dao and his horse hid in the bushes, observing the leader, who exuded a commanding aura. Changdal wondered if they were reinforcements but couldn't understand why they had arrived so quickly. It was strategist by Han Chaewon of Black Rock City, arriving with reinforcements. The young master raced toward him, complaining about being betrayed and abandoned by his soldiers. Without hesitation, strategist by plunged his sword into the young master's throat, silencing him as the young master mouthed pleas for mercy. As the young master collapsed, bleeding, Bai ordered his soldiers to collect the body, declaring it was time to return. A pop-up appeared, detailing information about Bai Han Chaewon, provided by the system goddess. It stated that Bai was a renowned strategist with a small but notable reputation, aged 52, possessing the skill of 7 sword slashes, and no hidden attributes. As Changdal read the information, he reflected on the difference between a great strategist like Bai and a warrior like Kinman, who could fight 1,000 men but belonged to a different league altogether. Strategist Bai suspected something was lurking in the bushes, prompting Changdal to stay hidden. Bai ordered his troops to retreat, leaving Changdal wondering why they were leaving so soon. He speculated that the era might be full of brilliant strategists, unlike Zenji. Frustrated, Changdal kicked a stone and cursed that they had taken the sword he wanted. A pop-up appeared, signaling the successful completion of their 11th defense and offering a lottery draw as a reward. The system goddess reappeared, lamenting how she had been stuck in a dark room and didn't want to return. Changdal was confused, recalling how energetic she had been before. With teary eyes, the goddess complained that Changdal had ignored her existence. Irritated, Changdal replied that he didn't care, since she only appeared to hit him. The goddess, angered, kicked him in the head, scolding him for locking her in the dark room. Still annoyed, Changdal asked if he could use bugs next time. The goddess, now holding a large wooden gavel, cynically asked what he thought, while Changdal chuckled on his horse. The new Qin Mountain map revealed the locations of Black Rock City, the Doghead Bandits, the Flying Tiger Bandits, the Wild Boar Bandits, the Apricot Blossom Bandits, the Bald Head Bandits, and Toad Village. The first assault from Black Rock City had reverberated across Qin New Mountain. The Flying Tiger Bandits, being the nearest to the conflict zone, were the first to launch an attack. The incident would soon be reported to the leader of Black Rock City by the city's military advisor. It was expected that the death of his son would become a significant turning point. Linger joyfully rode her white horse under the bright morning sky, calling out to her father, saying it felt like a dream. Kinman, silently grinning, followed behind her. Zenji instructed Linger to prepare the horses for the ride back to the village while he went to gather swords. Linger agreed, mentioning how much she loved the white horse. Just then, a horseman approached Zhu Shinji, referring to him as Old Man Zhu, seeking his attention. It was Jie Fu, the leader of the Flying Tiger Bandits, accompanied by his group of bandits. He asked Zhu Shinji if they could feed the horses they had stolen, offering to help lighten their burden. Zhu Shinji was startled and shocked at the sight of Jie Fu, replying that it was rare to see him there and that he must have woken up early. Jie Fu casually mentioned that they had made a fortune and suggested they discuss how to divide the horses, which worried Zhu Shinji. Linger bluntly told them they had earned the horses with their own efforts and asked why they should give them up. Despite her father urging her to stay quiet, Linger subtly rebelled. Zenji diplomatically responded that everyone worked hard and earned their fair share. However, Jie Fu disagreed, claiming they didn't earn more than the Flying Tiger Bandits, who had taken the majority of the spoils. Another bandit, on horseback, shouted to Jie Fu, telling him to stop talking and suggesting they take everything instead of sharing the profit. He charged forward with his sword, demanding the white horse. The white horse was struck on the head, losing balance, and eventually fell after being hit by an arrow, leaving the rider dazed and unable to see. Some of the Flying Tiger Bandits were amazed by the display of archery, while others worried about their second master. Kinman drew another arrow, fiercely warning them that if they took another step, they would die. Jie Fu questioned if Toad Village intended to start a war with them and suggested they split some of the profit, noting the large sum involved. Sarcastically, he asked if they planned to keep it all for themselves. They stood silent, like the horse with the arrow in its head and the second master lying on the ground. Just then, Chang Dal arrived on horseback, asking how the spoils should be divided, resting an axe on his shoulder. His men were surprised when he called for their village master. Riding toward the flying tiger bandits, they muttered among themselves that he was the son of the former leader of Toad Village. They had heard he was weak, but seeing him now, he seemed different from the rumors. Jie Fu, deep in thought, saw that Chang Dal was surrounded but remained calm, wondering if he had a hidden trick up his sleeve. Chang Dal then asked if they wanted to split the profits and suggested a simple solution. If he killed all of them, they wouldn't have to worry about dividing anything. His words enraged one of the bandits, who shouted at him, calling him a kid acting arrogant while surrounded. Another bandit added that even Chang Dal's father wouldn't have dared to speak to them like that. So what made him think he could? The flying tiger bandits, now furious, shouted for his death. But Chang Dal, unfazed, yelled back and cursed at them. Pointing at the bandits, Chang Dal asked if there were 1,000 of them. When Jie Fu questioned why it mattered, Chang Dal sneered and said that if there were fewer than 1,000, he wouldn't have enough men to kill. His sinister grin widened, his eyes turning red, and he added that he had already killed 1,000 soldiers and questioned whether it mattered if he killed another 1,000. Everyone was stunned and terrified. Jie Fu, wondering how Toad Village's small group had managed to scare off 1,000 soldiers, pleaded with Chang Dal to calm down, assuring him they weren't there to fight. Jie Fu, clenching his fists in respect, asked Chang Dal how he had accomplished such a feat, laughing loudly from his horse. Chang Dal caused some of the bandits to feel insulted as they watched him in silence. With a gesture of his finger, he claimed to possess a divine technique, then raised his hand and said he could summon thunder. The flying tiger bandits gazed upward in anticipation as Chang Dal raised his hand and pointed toward the sky. The sky remained clear, and the sun shone brightly. Chang Dal repeated his claim that he could summon thunder, leaving the bandits puzzled and speechless. Inside, he wondered if Warrior Lin could hear his words and urged him to hurry. The bandits, now furious, accused Chang Dal of being a lying child and mocked him for trying to deceive them. Despite their anger, Chang Dal persisted, shouting, "Thunder!" again just as the armed bandits charged at him, intent on killing him. Suddenly, a deafening explosion erupted, scattering stone debris in every direction. Some of the debris struck the bandits on the head, stunning them. Chang Dal, though terrified on the inside, maintained his calm outward appearance, secretly relieved that things had worked out. He then aggressively demanded if anyone else wanted to experience his thunder, leaving the flying tiger bandits frozen in fear and awe. In ancient times, people worshipped various gods, burning yellow papers and casting them into wells to make the water holy. It was an era filled with believers, and Chang Dal's dramatic performance was enough to make them believe in him. Even Jie Fu, the leader of the flying tiger bandits, was frightened, though he kept his composure. In his mind, he thought that if that thunder had struck him, he would have surely died. Jie Fu convinced himself that Chang Dal had used the same power to defeat the 1,000 soldiers, which explained their retreat. Chang Dal continued to point his finger at the bandits, commanding them to move aside and threatening that they would face his thunder if they didn't comply. The flying tiger bandits screamed in terror and scrambled out of the way as Chang Dal rode past them, chanting thunder over and over. Just as he was passing by, Jie Fu suddenly called out, asking him to wait. Chang Dal, sweating profusely, feared he had been exposed. He turned back and calmly asked what Jie Fu wanted. Jie Fu remarked that they had too many horses and questioned if they could feed them all. Chang Dal, now sarcastic, replied that even if they couldn't feed the horses, they could always eat them. With that, he rode back to the village, his carriage filled with horses and loot. Meanwhile, night had fallen, and the crescent moon was veiled by thin clouds. At the city lord's mansion, lit only by candles, the city lord lay in bed, surrounded by young women, a cup of liquor in his hand, and a fruit bowl beside him. Strategist Bai entered the room, carrying the corpse of the young master, blood dripping onto the floor. He called the city lord's name repeatedly before kneeling and laying the body of the young master on the ground. explaining that the young master had been ambushed and killed by bandits. The city lord, startled, bolted upright, his eyes wide in disbelief. He trembled as he screamed for his son, rushing to embrace the lifeless body. Tears streamed down his face as he cradled his son, while Strategist Bai quietly knelt down beside him. Then, without warning, Strategist Bai drew his sword and unleashed a powerful, electrified seven-sword slash, striking the city lord in the chest, causing blood to flow. The city lord collapsed but quickly rose, realizing that Strategist Bai had been the one to kill his son. Holding his bloody chest, the city lord confronted him, and Strategist Bai admitted to the crime. His sword, glowing with a purple aura, Strategist Bai charged at the city lord, complaining that the lord had been on the throne for too long. He struck again, but the city lord dodged, demanding to know why this was happening. Strategist Bai explained that it was an era of war and that chaos was inevitable. He said the empire was weakening, and many heroes across the land were waiting for the right moment to seize control. However, the city lord had become a useless man who cared only for indulgence, alcohol, meat, and women. Repeating that the lord was no longer fit to rule, Strategist Bai declared that he would take the throne. The young women in the bed were paralyzed with fear as the city lord, filled with rage, struck back, reminding Strategist Bai that he had been nothing more than a woodcutter before the war with the Ring clan. He questioned how someone like Bai, who had only read a few worthless books, dared to challenge him. The city lord raised his hand, smashing through Strategist Bai's defenses, while reminding him that without his help, Bai would have never risen to his current status. The city lord's torch snapped, and Strategist Bai staggered backward. The city lord continued, asserting that even with the empire in decline, Bai could never seize the throne. As blood spilled from his chest, Strategist Bai knelt, coughing. He admitted that he was ashamed, acknowledging that the city lord was indeed a man who had kept the city safe for 37 years, earning the title of the Seventh Tiger. The city lord, now wielding a tall staff, sneered, calling Strategist Bai his dog, and stating that if he couldn't serve as a loyal dog, then he had no use for him. He mocked Bai further, saying he had killed more people than Bai had even seen, and that Bai was just a frog in a well. Both men, enraged, charged at each other, their strikes heavy and furious. Suddenly, a delicate hand from one of the young women reached out, grabbing the city lord's arm, stunning him. The young woman then pierced a pin into the city lord's side, making him scream in agony as he turned to face her. In that moment, Strategist Bai plunged his sword into the city lord's chest, causing blood to gush from the wound. The city lord let out a final scream before collapsing to the ground. Standing over him with his blood-stained sword, Strategist Bai knew he wasn't fit to be the city lord, but he still wanted to try. As the city lord lay dying, he mumbled something about Black Rock City, calling it the kingdom's gateway. In his final breath, he warned not to let it fall into the hands of the Ring tribe, or the world would descend into chaos. This left Strategist Bai momentarily speechless. As the candles flickered near the draped curtains, Strategist Bai bid farewell to the city lord. That night, the city lord's mansion was engulfed in flames. The warm rays of the sun shone down on the wheat fields of Toad Village as Zhu Xinji scolded his village master for lazing around, reminding him that they needed to harvest the wheat quickly before the stolen horses starved. A basket full of wheat lay on the ground while birds pecked at the remaining bits. Chong Dao, exhausted, gave up and complained that he couldn't go on, saying he was too tired. The wheat needed to be cut to be harvested, and a sweaty warrior Lin couldn't believe a warrior like him was doing such mundane work. Meanwhile, Chong Dao sat leaning against a rock, complaining of a stomachache, claiming he couldn't muster any energy. Zenji loaded the wheat onto the carriage while continuing to lecture his village master about his laziness, reminding him that he had used the same excuse the day before. Chong Dao then held his head, claiming he had a headache as he walked toward Zenji. But Zenji wasn't swayed and continued scolding him. He warned that if they waited too long, the sun would dry the wheat, and it would crumble at the slightest touch, leading to a loss of the harvest. As Chong Dao contemplated, a red beetle crawled across the field, sparking an idea in his mind. He hadn't robbed anyone in days, and he couldn't forget that he was a bandit. Warrior Lin ran after Chang Dal, eager to help him, leaving Zenji stunned as he watched them go. Later, some poor villagers trekked through K Mountain, and a son asked his father if there were any bandits nearby. The father told him that if he was afraid of bandits, he should forget about finding a wife. Led by their father, they were on their way to sell firewood and buy a donkey so they would have something to show when asking for marriage. The father joked, asking if they didn't dream of owning a horse instead. Hidden behind the trees, Warrior Lin and Chang Dal overheard them. The son argued that horses and donkeys were different, to which his father asked what the difference really was. Before they could finish their conversation, Chang Dal and Warrior Lin leapt out from the trees. The father and his sons, terrified, dropped to their knees and begged for mercy. Chang Dal, amused, asked why they were kneeling and told them to stand up. Hearing that they wanted to buy a horse, Chang Dal was pleased. The father explained they couldn't afford a horse and planned to buy a donkey to help his eldest son find a wife. Once they had a donkey, they could ask a matchmaker for help. Laughing, Chang Dal said they were in luck because he sold horses. He asked if they felt happy or fortunate, but the father, trembling, said they didn't have much money. Chang Dal asked how much they had, and with a shaking hand, the father offered 2 copper coins. Accepting the coins, Chang Dal then inquired if they had anything else. The father mentioned they had 4 wild vegetable breads that their mother had baked for the journey. Warrior Lin took one of the breads and tasted it, confirming it was good. Lin whispered to Chang Dal that 2 copper coins and 4 wild vegetable breads were not enough for a horse. Chang Dal replied that they needed to sell the horses or else they would have to eat them. Seeing the father anxiously waiting, Chang Dal suggested they be kind and sell the horse, doing a good deed for the poor. Warrior Lin confirmed if they were really going to sell it, and Chang Dal agreed. He told the father he'd give him a discount since they were his first customers, and instructed them to follow him back to the mountain. The father, on his knees, cried and begged for mercy, offering himself in place of his children, as they still needed to provide for their family. Chang Dal rested the axe head near the father, scaring him, and in a stern voice, told them to follow. The weary father and sons followed Chang Dal as he instructed Warrior Lin to take care of the customers. The son asked his father if they would be killed, to which the sweating father told him not to be a coward. The son pointed out his father's shaking legs, but the father explained that if they were going to kill them, he would risk his life to stall them so his sons could escape. When they reached the steep slope leading to Toad Village, the father warned his sons to be ready to run. Chang Dal gestured upward, telling them to climb the mountain. At the stable, Chang Dal leaned on the wall and casually asked them to pick a horse. The father, confused, was surprised they were actually being offered a horse. He assured Chang Dal that one would be enough. However, Chang Dal, subtly annoyed, complained that they had wasted his time and were only asking for one. The father, flustered, asked if 2 would be possible. Hearing this, the sons smiled in excitement. Chang Dal questioned why they only wanted 2, suggesting that each of the 3 children could have their own horse. The father, however, admitted they couldn't afford to feed 4 horses, leaving the sons disappointed. Chang Dal agreed 2 horses would suffice and asked if they knew how to harvest wheat. The father replied that they had some farm experience. Chang Dal told them if they could harvest a field of wheat before sunset, they could take the 2 horses. Under the blazing sun, Warrior Lin handed them a sharp scythe and led them to the field. Meanwhile, Linger arrived with a bowl of food for her father, while Zhu Xinji stood by the carriage full of wheat, once again scolding Chang Dal for being lazy. Chang Dal, resting under the shade of a tree, disagreed, claiming he had worked hard. In Chang Dal's mind, Toad Village felt like a small family. Kimmin was a strong warrior, Warrior Lin was like a reliable younger brother, and Linger was a hard-working helper. Even with an unmarried prisoner, he felt content, as though he only needed a wife. Zhu Xinji, though grumpy, was like the village's wise old grandfather. Linger happily sat on the wheat-filled carriage, and Chang Dal realized he liked this place. As the poor villagers toiled in the wheat field, The son asked his father if they would really be given the horses. The father, uncertain, replied that he thought they meant it but feared they would be killed if they didn't finish by sunset. As the sky turned fiery orange, the villagers finished their task, and the father offered to help grind the wheat. Chongdal declined, telling them there was no need, and allowed them to choose 2 horses. As the father and his sons left with the horses, warrior Lin, Chongdal, and Zhu Xinji watched them go. The son, in disbelief, asked his father if he was dreaming, amazed that the bandits had let them take 2 horses. As the fiery orange sunset bathed the village, the father and son marveled at the kindness of the bandits, talking among themselves about how the bandits had not only harvested wheat but also ate wild vegetable bread. They concluded that the bandits must truly be gods.